Today we're going to talk a bit about the changes that Chaos Space Marines can expect in 9th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we've been going through the rules leaks for 9th edition and talking a bit about how they might impact the game. Today over on Warhammer Community, Games Workshop have talked a little bit about how Chaos might be changing in 9th edition. They did say a few interesting things on the article, but mainly I've made a video that's my own thoughts on how Chaos Space Marines might be faring in 9th. For some reason the Warhammer Community previews seem to be focused on rules that we already know and can already use, rather than talking about what's changing. So the biggest point that they said in the article was that there'll be less incentive to soup in the new edition, and in general I would say that this is usually going to be a good thing for Chaos Space Marines, as they are fairly functional in one detachment. You can get quite a workable Chaos army out of just a single battalion, and any given slot can be a unit that's hundreds and hundreds of points. As a fairly elite army that didn't tend to run 3 different battalions in a list for most of the time, Chaos Space Marines seem to be one of the armies that's going to be a buff for the command points. Although I will be interested to see what happens with their Red Corsairs, who currently have a detachment rule that if you fill out the entire detachment of a battalion of Red Corsairs with Chaos Space Marines, then you get 8 command points for the battalion rather than 5. This was actually really quite a powerful way of getting tons of command points into a Chaos army, so I really hope that the Red Corsairs will continue to provide command points in some way. One way or the other, that rule is going to need a day 1 FAQ. It just won't really work with the way that battalions cost command points rather than give you them. Having said that, while Chaos Space Marines can function with one battalion, a lot of the more intricate tricks that you can do with Chaos armies in a more competitive game tend to involve using multiple different battalions, different stratagems, and often using cross-synergy with either Death Guard, Thousand Suns or Chaos Demons to be able to unleash some of their very nastiest combos, stacking a bunch of psychic powers, stratagems or other abilities on certain units. I do think that the command point change likely will punish that style of play a bit more. On the whole though, without having to pay for relatively expensive tax HQs and troops for battalions, I do suspect that the average Chaos army will have a few more command points to play with when you've added the 12 that you start with to the one that you gain on each battle round, plus the potential for a bit of CP farming. Obviously we'll have to wait till we see the full rules, but I strongly suspect that the emphasis is going to be back on Chaos Space Marines over Cultists. After the 3 points that we've seen previewed, which are Cultists, Intercessors and Necrons, the Cultists have gone up by 50% compared with the others, at 17% and 9% respectively. This is an absolute horrendous nerf to the Cultists in terms of points, and unless they're going to be gaining some significant rules in the new edition, which it doesn't really appear apparent that they are going to be, I really do have a hard time imagining that they're going to be more competitive than Chaos Marines. I suspect, like most of the others, that the Chaos Marine standard unit is going to go up a few points, but even if it did, I strongly suspect that the Games Workshop aren't going to rise it by 5 or 6 points, so in terms of relative points changes, they're just going to be so much more attractive over Cultists. Added to all the buffs that Chaos Marines have got with Bolter Discipline, Hateful Assault, and removing some of the Cultist synergy with Legion traits and things, I suspect that Chaos Space Marines are going to be revolving around the actual Chaos Space Marines just a bit more. With the changes that they've unveiled, in general 9th edition seems to be a little bit more friendly to close combat. You can play on a much smaller table size. Now that they've confirmed that Overwatch is going to be a stratagem, there's just going to be far less of it about. More line of sight terrain means that there's more scope for close combat units moving up the board without getting shot. And even previewed today, they mentioned that if you keep a unit off in strategic reserves and you bring it in inside your own deployment zone, then you can literally set up right next to any enemy units that have ventured that far out, potentially getting some incredibly short charges off. All of these seem like pretty excellent buffs to close combat when taken together. I know that some ranged units have had some increase, such as blast weapons, but for the most part that's not going to be the biggest problem for Chaos Marines, aside from a few units such as huge units of Possessed or maybe Chaos Cultists. Most units tend to be at least pretty elite, so shouldn't cop too much extra damage from blasts. I think Possessed and Khorne Berserkers are going to be interesting choices. In particular, I think that Khorne Berserkers are going to like that reduction in Overwatch. As a relatively fragile unit point for point, losing a few incredibly angry Space Marines on the charge can be a really big difference. On a more negative note for Possessed Bombs and some of the other Chaos Super Synergies, now they've confirmed that at least for hit rolls you won't be able to stack buffs any more than -1. That really does break a few of the key combos. You could do some immensely silly things with Chaos Marine units, using things like Dark Apostles, Psychic Powers and Stratagems to get you anywhere from a -3 to -4 to hit, depending on the unit. While this was certainly a very powerful tool for Chaos Space Marines, to be honest I can't say I liked it being part of the game. In the same way that I'm not the biggest fan of Eldar Flyers having -3 to hit, it just completely removes interactivity, and you can have strange situations in which a big unit is standing right out in the open in front of a massive tank line of guard, for example, and the guard player literally couldn't hit it due to reasons. The buffs individually are actually still going to be pretty powerful. Still going from hitting normally to hitting on -1 is actually quite a big deal, particularly for armies that hit on 4 such as Guard, Tau and Genestealer Cult. And it means that it's just a lot more incentive to invest the points that you would have spent on those buffing characters in either providing different buffs or just more units in general. I think there might be more emphasis on the other sneaky tricks that the Chaos can get up to. For example, using that Alpha Legion stratagem that means that you can't even target a possessed unit unless it's literally the closest thing to the model that's firing. That might be the new best way to protect things like possessed and obliterators. Frankly, it was pretty darn strong already. Tying in with the assault theme, as well as all of the various assault buffs that we've already mentioned, I think that vehicles that both combine a bit of shooting and melee are going to be extra powerful, and Chaos has absolutely loads of those. From all the various patterns of Forge World Dreadnoughts, Lord Discordants, Mauler Fiends, Venom Crawlers or Defilers, you really can be putting a lot of vehicles on the table that are happy to shoot the enemy a bit and then get mixed up in melee. A lot of these guys suffer ballistic skill penalties if they happen to move and shoot with their weapons, and now that's not going to be a thing for heavy weapons anymore. They're just going to be a lot more usable as a result, not having to choose between advancing towards the enemy or staying still and unloading with heavy guns. Also, the fact that all of these are going to be charging towards the enemy, it just raises the chance that they'll be locked in close combat and be able to access that rule where they shoot all their guns into close combat. Particularly powerful for any flamers that you might have on the units. Things like heavy flamers on Dreadnoughts or Hellbrutes might be taken a bit more now. In terms of recent miniature updates, I remember that Fabius Bile is now a thing as well, and I think that he's going to be making an addition to several Chaos lists in 9th. I reviewed his full rules yesterday on the channel, but if you didn't catch that, then his new rules allow him to pretty much full guaranteed augment a Chaos units to be +1 toughness now, as well as being a pretty decent fighty character in himself. I'm sure that we'll see him slotted in alongside regular Chaos Marine units in detachments quite a bit. Just as that +1 toughness rule is so helpful in so many situations, huge amounts of the Chaos decks would profit a lot from that, whether it's Chaos Terminators, Khorne Berserkers, Emperor's Children, or Possessed. He also allows access to the creations of Bile, a whole new way that you can play Space Marines in one detachment in your army, and we'll be covering them on the channel tomorrow. The blast weapon changes will help a fair few Chaos units. One that I've particularly got my eye on is the Forge Fiend's Ectoplasma Cannons. They haven't 100% confirmed it, but based on what they have told us about blast weapons, I'd be very surprised if they aren't blast. These things are going to be really quite efficient at rinsing heavy infantry units now. Basically, if the unit is greater than 6 models in size, you'll be getting a flat 3 shots out of all of them, which equates to a 50% damage increase against those targets every single time he shoots. Having an annoying 4+ ballistic skill was a real handicap to him as well, as it meant that you never wanted to move him under any circumstances, and being a static firing piece is definitely a disadvantage. With his moving and shooting penalty removed, he'll be able to blaze away at ballistic skill 4+, while trotting around 8 inches per turn, getting optimal lines of sight. And if they manage to befriend a Lord Discordant to run around with, then they'll be hitting on 3s as well. Could be quite a lot of scary plasma. Another unit I'm really quite interested to see how much of a splash they'll be making in 9th are the Helldrakes. Everything about 9th seems to be pretty geared towards them now. Very importantly, they weren't included in that aircraft list when they previewed the aircraft and flyers rules, which means they will be able to hide behind obscuring terrain such as ruins. With the Helldrake's absolutely ridiculous movement, this means they could be hiding behind terrain in your deployment zone, the opponent completely unable to deal with them, jump all the way across to the opponent's deployment zone, roast some guys and charge in, now probably with no overwatch, and if for whatever reason the opponent can't drop back from them, or charges them and they survive till the next turn, they'll be able to auto-hit and roast people with their Bale Flamer in close combat. If points stay somewhat similar for Helldrakes, then I think that they're definitely one to watch. Not the greatest damage output, but such an awesome utility piece. Finally, talking of points changes, we do know that they're happening, and we can always hope that Games Workshop manages to address some of the issues in the Chaos decks, hopefully breathing a new lease of life into certain units. There's plenty of options that just aren't taken because they're too high costed at the moment, and I think that most people would agree on things like Mutilators, Chaos Predators or Chaos Landvaders seeing a relative points cut. I know in 9th edition everything is going up in points, but that does mean in terms of relatively getting better, if they don't go as much up in points percentage wise, then it means that they will be receiving a relative points drop. In any case, I'm really looking forward to how things are going to be changing in 9th. It'll be really interesting to see what sort of units and strategies emerge as the top dogs as we go into the new edition. If you can think of anything else that might be potentially great for the Chaos Marines, then please let me know down in the comments. And feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see other similar discussion videos as we get up to 9th. If you've been enjoying the videos, I'd just like to mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which is what allows me to dedicate quite so much time to video production. If you are watching regularly, then any support on Patreon is absolutely greatly appreciated. Making all of these videos each day does take quite a bit of effort. As well as contributing to the video production, channel Patreons get a few advantages, such as being able to see some videos early, regular polls on what sort of videos come next for the channel, and monthly prize draws, such as the one at the start of July, where we'll be giving away 3 copies of the Guard Start collecting box to 3 patrons chosen at random. If any of that sounds good, then the link to the page is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.